Today I went to visit the Midleton Distillery Experience, home to several iconic Irish brands of whiskey, namely Jameson, Powers and Redbreast. The distillery dates back to the 18th century and I got the full tour of the place, but I wasn't here to taste whiskey. I was here to meet with Master Cooper Ger Buckley. This 5th generation Cooper is the kind of man you just want to listen to talk about his craft so passionately for a couple of hours. So that's exactly what I did, and he was good enough to let me film it and share with you guys. I leave him do the rest of the talking and I hope you enjoy.
So my name is Ger Buckley. I'm the Master Cooper here in Midleton Distillery. Brands like Jameson and Middleton Rare and Powers and the spot whiskies and things like that. So I'm now in my 48th year working as a Cooper. My family were Coopers going back well over 200 years. And a lot of my tools that I have here today now, some of them are going back 150 years. And it's not that they're stored away antiques or whatever, they're tools I use because they're hard to replace. So you tools get handed down through 2-3 generations at least. We normally use white oak. You can't use red oak. Red oak had got veins as big as your arm that if you put any liquid into a red oak cask, it'll soak into the wood and pour out the bottom. Now that's not new knowledge or new technology, that's dating back to the Romans and before that, that they understood making a wine cask, you couldn't be using red oak. Back then, they were starting to understand the different types of wood give different flavours. So Pliny the Elder wrote that cask made out of yew wood, which is poisonous, that anybody who drank that wine ended up dying, and was warning against having barrels made from yew wood, what we call angel share. So we lose about 2% of our whiskey out through the barrel. So after about 18-20 years, we've lost about 42% of the barrel. The law in Scotland says you must mature your whiskey in oak, whereas the law in Ireland says you must mature your whiskey in wood. So we have been able to experiment with other types of wood, such as chestnut, acacia, Japanese cedar, cherry. We've about 7 or 8 now that we've done at this stage, and they all bring totally different flavours. And the thing about why we leave whiskey in a barrel for so long is that the longer you leave it in a cask, in a barrel, you get a more and more oak contribution in the taste. So a Jameson 18 or Jameson 21 or something like that, you will have 60, 70, even 80% of the taste is from the wood. You're drinking oak, okay? And that's why we leave it in the cask for so long. Like a lot of people don't understand that. If I get people in here to my cooperage just for 10 minutes even, what I do is I take a lid out of a kind of a dried out cask. The whiskey's long dried out of the wood. And I get them to smell the cask. And the first thing, the reaction they always have is, oh, that smells just like my whiskey. But I said, no, you're smelling oak. It's the oak we're getting into the whiskey. And when you smell whiskey, most of the time you're smelling a lot of the contribution of oak. On a young whiskey, you will be getting a lot more distillate flavours from the still. So you need both. You need very good distillation and very good casks and warehousing as time goes on. So on my side of it, it's all about the wood. I don't get involved in distilling or anything like that, so I don't really talk about too much about what I don't know. And the thing about making a cask or a barrel is that it's dating back 4,500 years is the earliest evidence we have of it. So hieroglyphs in Egypt show tubs made with a hoop, and it would have been a wooden hoop. And the guy who made that tub in Egypt 4,500 years ago, he had 3 challenges. He probably had a hollowed out vessel as a hollowed out log as a vessel, much like our own martyr that we have for the All-Ireland Hurling final, which is an old Celtic drinking vessel with 4 handles. That's made out of one solid piece of wood. Very similar. So how do I make more of those? Can I just make it out individual pieces? You can make your circle with your pieces, what we call staves. Calculate the angles of every piece. You can do that through trial and error. You'll eventually get there. But how am I going to bind the whole thing? How am I going to hold it together? So by having it slightly sloped out, that the more I push down a hoop, the tighter I can bind the whole thing. And this is an era now before glue or even nails, where even the carpentry you see from Egyptian times, it's a lot of dowels and things holding even corners of of sarcophagus together and things like that. So the third challenge he had was, how do I make a lid that it's not going to leak? Okay, so by cutting a groove at the top of the lid with what I call a croze, for anybody in carpentry or whatever, you might call it a router today. This is the first router 4,500 years ago to cut the first groove. Okay, and then you would go around the circumference of the cask 6 times with a compass. That will give you exactly the size of your lid, your head. You chamfer that on both sides. That will fit into the groove, and when you tighten your hoops, you got a sealed vessel. And I don't do anything different today, 4,500 years later. I do the exact same things. The only difference now is now I have metal hoops instead of timber hoops. Timber would have been like ash, hazel, flexible woods. So you would grow a coppice wood, which is the earliest form of farming, dating back maybe 100,000 years, where when you chop down a tree and it sends up shoots, what we call coppice wood, that can be made into fences, can be made into spears, can be used for whittling for a roof, but also could be split in two. So you get a flat side against the barrel and the round on the outside of the branch, and that's your hoop as such. And that would have been done well up to maybe 60 years ago. But prior to that, it's only after the industrial age where metal became cheap enough that now I can make metal hoops. Because metal was so expensive to make, you had to get a blacksmith to make it, to make your tools or your weapons or your farm instruments. And that's all it was for. It wasn't going to be wasted just putting on barrels. So other than that, other than steel hoops, I don't do anything different. I do exactly the same things my dad taught me 48 years ago, with the same tools, with the same bench, the same boxes. So nothing much has ever changed in here. And that's the beauty of my craft of coopering, in that no one comes in here to show me new techniques, new tools, new software. Nothing changes. All that I try to do is pass it on to the next generation. So we've trained up 2 coopers over the last 10 years. Our latest cooper qualified in March. The other thing that's important about coopering as well is the way the wood is cut, is what we call quarter sawn. So we have a piece here, and it's basically a ring. And what we try to do is get the rings of the tree at 90 degrees to the board. Okay? Again, no, that's not new technology. That's ancient. That's the Romans understood that. The Vikings making their long ships would always split the wood to make sure the rings are at 90 degrees to make the planking for the boat. And that doubles the strength of the wood. So it's really important to me as a cooper. When you see quarter sawn wood, you start to see the medulla rays, tiger rings, that beautiful grain in oak. That's a quarter sawn piece of oak. In other words, the rings are at 90 degrees to the board. That's how you know if it's quarter sawn or quarter split. And that's important because those medulla rays are what the tree builds up in summer to sustain itself through winter. So a lot of the sugars and caramels and vanillas that are in oak are stored in there. They must wrap around the barrel, not coming from inside to out, because if it comes from inside to out, that is a passageway for liquid to escape or leak. So there's a double reason why we have to quarter saw the oak. And the other unique thing about coopering as well, we do metalwork as well as woodwork. So we have to make our hoops. And traditionally the hoops will come in flat. We've got to splay the hoop so it'll take the same shape as the barrel. If it stayed flat, it'll just dig into the wood. So you do a lot of metalwork on an anvil. And my anvil that I have here, you can see how out of shape it's gone from wear after millions and millions of hits by generations of hoopers. So to show you the rest of the tools that I have. So to explain some of when I pick up a tool that someone else has used or whatever, it's nice to try and get the history or understand the history of a particular tool. So for example, a guy I worked with for many years, great cooper, great friend of mine, had this hammer his entire working life. You can see it's a very old style type hammer. But what's unique about it is that he never changed the handle. So his father never changed it, and he never changed it. So over 2 generations of Coopers, the handle wore down gradually from maybe 80, 90 years of use. And when you hold it down, it feels very thin. And the other unique thing about it is there's no wear whatsoever on the ball of the hammer, because their technique was perfect. They hit everything right in the middle. That way, they never put any pressure on the handle, never put any vibration up through the handle into your elbow, into your shoulder, so you never got any injuries. Whereas the Cooper who had this hammer had a very bad habit of slightly off center and wore down the hammer. The problem here is you're sending that vibration up because you're not hitting exactly in the ball. He'll eventually end up with maybe tennis elbow, or what as they call it nowadays, or a shoulder injury. And I work with a lot of Coopers who had very bad elbows by the time they finished from constantly using the hammer. But if you use it correctly, like this Cooper did, Donny O'Regan, perfect technique. So I got my second handle. My handle split, so this handle is made of oak. And I had a habit of just every time I rested the hammer on the top of the cask, I was cutting a notch here. And eventually after 47 years, I only went last year, the notch eventually broke the handle. So that's what happens when you have a bad habit. The other thing is, I was saying some of my tools are called after animals. This is a swift. It's a type of spoke shave. It's for usually shaving the lid, the head of the cask, to get it flat. It's got my father's marks on it, 3 marks. That we're going back in my family. So it's old school in regards to you have a wedge and you have an iron that you sharpen. You can take out and sharpen all that. So a lot of my tools are like that. Another one that has the same principle, old tools, is what I call a topping plane. So it's to shave the top of the barrel to get it flat, so it's in the shape of the cask. So you go around the top of the cask with this topping plane. This is one of the tools that my apprentice made. He copied this one. This tool is called a downright. It's for going down the cask, so it's a different type of shape. As I said, I forgot to say what this is a swift. It's got the 2 wings on it. The other thing that a Cooper would always have as well, if you started out 100,000 years ago and you had a club made out of flint and you get a sharp edge on that flint, you create an axe. Okay? And this is a Cooper's broadaxe. This is only beveled on one side. This isn't for chopping wood. This is for carving wood. And later I'm going to go through making a stave from start to finish using the axe. The handle is pushed away from the blade, so when you come down a stave, I don't clip my fingers. This, I've been reliably told by a tool expert from Sheffield in England, that this is almost identical to an axe used by Caesar with his Roman armies 2,000 years ago. And anybody who's watched the reconstruction of Notre Dame and see that roof being remade, this is the axe they're using. It's the same axe the Vikings used making their long ships. It's the only way you could prepare wood, maybe up to 150 years ago in the industrial age, where you could make a beam or a board or a plank. You started out by this, you might come back later and plane it, but to get it into the rough shape, to get it there. But they could be so good with this axe that when they were finished, you'd feel no tool marks and you'd think somebody had planed it already. That's how good you could be with one of these axes. The handle's off center, so when I hold it, it's very balanced in my hand. So it's not as clumsy as it first looks, or a weapon or anything like that. It's actually an essential piece of kit. If I work it back towards myself, I create this tool called an adze. Still easy to buy one of these days. You see some of the English companies selling them, and they're still for sale across Europe and France and Germany, because people still want to work traditionally with traditional tools. And an adze is a very universal tool. You can do a lot of shaving with it. You can do the top of a cask. I can do the side. Shipwrights might do the top of a deck. Lots of crafts would have had an adze. and they come in all sizes and weights depending on the type of work you want to do. So in New Zealand, an adze is a sacred tool. Any of their museums you go to, you see various sizes. What they used was a green jade, which could get a very sharp edge. So they had stone adzes. They would have big, huge adze for doing out a hollow canoe. And more their carving is done with an adze. Funny enough, they didn't seem to have an axe, but they had various sized adze. They could even go to the very small to do little bits of carving. And they would have one of them as a chisel as well to do further going in. But an adze, and the same on the Americas. Native Americans had stone adzes, and what they would do to hollow out a canoe is chip off, they would burn the middle of the canoe, they would burn the canoe, out the fire, chip off the charcoal, burn down further, out the fire, chip off the charcoal, and eventually you're chipping it all out of the canoe and you end up with a hollowed out canoe. So that's one of my favourite tools, an adze. You have specialised tools like this, which is a hoil. This is used on the inside of the barrel to carve that section, okay? It's called a hand hoil. There's another tool that does the same thing, which I'll come to in a few minutes. This tool is a type of lever. It sits on top of the barrel. When I push up my hip, I can pull back the stave and I can get a rush or a reed in there. And the reason we call it a dog, it's got 2 ears on it. It's a term you hear nowadays in engineering. You get dogs to pull things off engines and all sorts of things. Or you might have a dog sit on a bench that would clamp something to the bench for you. But this, I like to think, is the original dog. And so we'll leave that there. Specialised tools, like these saws, that's if you wanted to hand cut this groove, okay? And to cut that groove, I must have the shape of the lid. It must be round, it can't be straight. Because when I put in the top of the lid, so if we look at this one, I'll show you. It's round. And when it sits inside here, it'll fit perfectly. If I was to cut this as a straight line, not the whole lot would engage the lid and then it'd get leaks. I'd only have the corners touching and the middle wouldn't be touching, so that's why you must cut a round groove. You can also do that with another tool called a crows. And this would be a crows. This is the tool that guy in Egypt invented 4,500 years ago, just to make the groove at the top of the cask for the lid to fit into. So this is the groove at the top. This would sit on top of the barrel, cutting that groove. Okay? My granddad had this tool. My dad had it. We wore all this side down from riding along the top of the cask. Now I'm wearing all the other side down. I've cutters here. I have 2 points that I call hawks. So the first pass, I scribe 2 lines, top and bottom. And on the next pass, I have what I call a lance that plows out a lovely, crisp line. I don't get any tearing in the wood. And that's what that does. The original one of that would have been like this. It would have been a piece of a saw. So this is for doing a small pint bar or something like that. And it would just be a saw teeth. So the guy in Egypt 4,500 years ago had a piece of a saw just like this that he sawed the groove all the way around. And they come in various sizes. So this is mahogany. This belonged to my grandfather's brother, who was a ship's cooper in the British Navy. And he had access to a bit of mahogany instead of, my dad had only access to oak, because he was a distillery cooper. And moving on. So another way of carving that piece here, and that's essential, because these are pieces of a wine cask now, staves of wine cask. They must be perfectly lined up and smooth. So you plane the inside. And then on the outside, you would maybe use a spoke shave or a swift to plane the outside. So they must be exactly the same thickness. If one is heavier than the next, say if we get a heavier stave, like this American barrel, because this is heavier, it's going to be out, it's not going to match, and it's going to be, this one is going to be too thin. And what happens then is, because there's not equal pressure from the hoops, because it's not the same thickness, it can leak. So to plane the inside of that, I have a specialized tool as well. I'm going to call it an inside plane, or we call it a hoil. Sits on top of the cask, and it's the shape of a stave. And I got the same idea again, where you got the wedge and you got the tool here to carve it. I have different sizes, slightly smaller one for doing a smaller cask. Smaller one again for doing maybe a firkin or something like that. I've replaced a lot of the pieces that have worn down over time. There's another version of the same tool. So the tools can be very specialized, but once they're working right, once they're sharp, you can really work fast. So that's some of the secrets of coopering, and that this must all be planed equally. Compasses, as I was talking about, the only measuring tool in making a barrel is different size compasses. This is a butt compass. We would make these compasses ourselves. So you can make it bigger or smaller. The tread is clockwise and anti-clockwise, so that it'll push these pins apart. If the tread was the same direction on both sides, it wouldn't push the pins apart, it would just keep going in and out. And on the smaller one here is the same man that had that small crows, this one. As I said, he was a ship's cooper in the British Navy in 1880. So this compass is over 140 years old. It still works absolutely perfectly. The groove, as I said, the threads are clockwise and anti-clockwise. It's probably made from ash rather than oak. It's a very severe curve for that. To make that, somebody in my family had to get literally bolts and hand foil the thread. So there's a left and a right thread that will go into this piece here and cut that. And then to cut the other piece, I have a thread making tool, has a little cutter in here that will cut the cross section piece. And these now, again, have been handed down through my family over generations. And one of the things I want to do in retirement or days off is start making compasses again by hand. It's kind of unique to Cork. In Dublin cooperages and stuff like that, they had dividers or something similar to that. Or they might have a compass. Compass around there somewhere that I had where to go. I'm sure up in a minute. Yeah. You might have metal compasses. So I might use this for a smaller cask. But it is nice to be able to make your own tools and your own compass and stuff like that. The other tools that I would have would be maybe spoke shaves. This is a shop bought spoke shave. It's got the old type colour inside here. This is one my dad made. He's got his 3 marks on it. And I do find with these that the blade is kind of flatter angle at attacking the wood than the more sloped. They work actually much better than modern Stanley spoke shaves and stuff like that. These get a beautiful finish, they take a beautiful shaving, because I think, I suppose a modern brand like Middleton produce a similar type blade where it's a lower angle attack coming into the thing. So we would even make these ourselves. If you were doing a small barrel on the inside, to shave the inside the barrel, you would have little tools like that are round to take the shape of the inside the barrel. So if you're making a bucket, or maybe if we're making a butter churn, you would shave the inside the bucket down like that with these kind of tools. So they'd be specific, and people specialised maybe in a specific style of coopering. You had a couple of different styles. You would say white coopering would be a lot of, say, flour, that kind of thing. Dry coopering would be butter churns, wash tubs, all that kind of stuff. Tankards. Wet coopering is coopers for the distillery, the breweries, the wineries. And then you might have a country cooper that might make all the vessels for a village, such as the wash tubs now, the tankards, noggins, pins. There's over 50 or 60 different type of vessels that have names for different sizes, capacities, and stuff like that. And these are the type of tools that were used in that. Then you had knives, what I call knives. These are what most people nowadays call a draw knife. Okay, this is a small little one, usually a bigger one over there, and you pull it back towards yourself. This is a flat one, so this is for doing the outside of the barrel, what I call a backing knife. Okay, to make the lid, I have one that's round. I call this a heading knife, and I would hold this like this, and I would use it on the wood. I'll just show you for a second. We'll get a lid. And what I have here, cut in here, is a groove. And when I put it on here, then I can start to work from the quarter down. And the whole way down. And I do front and back. And then I do the other quarter, and then I reverse it to go back the other way. So that's what I mean by a heading knife. On the anvil, we will have a piece of metal, maybe inch thick, with a hole in it. We call this a bolster. It's for knocking out the rivets and making the hoop maybe smaller. And I would have obviously a cold chisel and maybe a punch to knock out the rivets, and we might film that in a minute. And the other thing that is kind of historical with coopering is that you had to try and make a lot of the tools yourself, because you couldn't just go out and buy everything. You could get some tools in from the UK, maybe from Sheffield or even London. So this would be what I call a stuffing knife. It's the cork, the rush or the reed, these pieces, into the top of the barrel. So we cork it in here. This is the only thing I have that helps me seal the barrel. This is a dry one. I would have this fairly moist, and I would cork it in. Now this was probably a farrier's file. Still has the threads on it from the file, and it had broken or whatever, and we made it into a tool specifically for that, because nothing was wasted. And even in my dad's box, which is still here, he had all bits of tools, bits of pieces of this and whatever. And it took me a long time to figure out why he was collecting all that stuff. For the simple reason, you threw nothing away because you couldn't replace it. You had to use everything you got. If an older cooper retired, try and get what you can from him as he's retiring. It's not like today now, you can just go online and buy whatever you want. So the same, even with the stick into the top of it is the handle. You used anything you can get your hands on that could help you make tools. There's another one, different type again. Bits of hoop to make the same stuffing knife, a hoop instead of. And that was actually the first tool I made when I started 48 years ago. I still have it. It was the first thing I ever made to help me get the rush into the barrel. You would have reamers. These are very old now, and so your hole in the cask had to be absolutely perfectly round and smooth, because when you put in a bung into that hole, you had to have perfect contact. If there's a little bit off, bit oval, anything like that, it'll leak. So you had to round your hole with what we call a reamer. And these would come in different sizes as well. And so I'm looking at some of the other stories, so sharpening tools. Simply have a knife and stone. And again, you can see how much I'm wearing down my oil stone. So if I'm sharpening my knife, for example, if I'm sharpening this one, literally add some oil, which helps lubricate but also helps remove a lot of the filing from the knife. And then I'll start to work my way down it. And then when I get so far, I kind of go with the grain, which will really bring up the edge. Taking a bit off the back to make sure I get that wire off the back, but I keep going up and down as much as I can off the back, and I keep doing that process till I'm satisfied that the whole thing is done. I'll have cloths there in a minute to clean that. I tend not to put any of my tools on a grindstone, because once you burn your tools, that's the end of them. Another purpose tool for a cooper would be what we call a rung shave. I think another name would be ring tool. Some people call it hollowing tool. I might use it to scrape the cask to get the lines off. Again, I always sharpen that as well with my oil stone. Some of the stories of oak, just looking at this. These are what we call oak galls. Anybody who's familiar with oak would probably know these. Some people call them oak apples. Basically what happens is we have a wasp that comes along as the acorn is growing, when it's just a bud, and injects a hormone into the acorn. It literally almost changes the DNA. Instead of growing an acorn, it grows a perfectly round ball. And it then comes back and drills a little hole, deposits its larvae, so it has food, it has a house, and eventually when the larva gets big enough, it'll drop out and eventually form into a wasp the following season. But when you get these in spring, when they're new, when they're still green, before the wasp has come back, and you crush them up with some metal filings and maybe a tiny bit of water, you get the best ink that's ever been made, called oak gall ink. You still find school kids today will go out and harvest the oak galls when they can find them. They're not that easy to find because the oak tree will only produce acorns every 6, 7, 8 years. And that's a defense for the oak tree, in that if it produced acorns every year, all the animals that depend on acorns, like wild boar, squirrels, everything, would be waiting for the acorns to come. But if the acorns only come every 6 or 7 or 8 years, you don't know what part of the forest the acorns are going to be in, and the animals are always searching. So that gives the acorn a chance to germinate and start forming a sapling, and that's why acorns only come every 6 or 7 years. And the wasp finds it. If you find these, you can make, so the Book of Kells, the American Constitution, the works of Dickens are all written in oak gall ink. And oak itself is revered as the king in the forest, because you could do so much with oak. You could turn the acorns into a type of flour to make a bread. You could make ink. You can make ships. You can make cathedrals. You can make barrels. And it's still regarded the most valuable tree in the forest. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make a stave with traditional hand tools in the way it's been done for thousands of years. So I'm going to try on my apron. And Cooper will always have some kind of apron. And the other folklore with Coopers is the work was so physical and so hard that your hands would always be swollen. Welts, bruises, cuts, splinters, and every Friday night you'd be trying to put cream and everything in your hands, trying to get your hands back into some kind of order. And when a cooper went out to eat or to drink, you never saw a cooper's hands. always kept his hands in his pockets or his arms folded. So he'd drink his pint, fold his arms, because he could be dressed in a suit, but if you saw his hands, that would give the game away. You knew by his hands how hard he worked. So we're going to start by just getting a piece of wood like that. And what we want to do is carve it with the axe. So what we want to try and achieve is, so this butt stave, it's wide in the middle, getting thinner towards the end. That's to get the concave shape of the cask. The only measuring tool that I have in coopering is the compass, as I've showed you. So everything from now on is by eye and by skill and experience. Every mistake I make along the way, I get leaks. And I can't have leaks. If I take too much wood off here, my cask will be too sloped. I'll never get the hoops to sit on there properly. If I take too little off, not enough slope, the cask will be too straight and the whole thing won't bind. It's totally up to me how much wood I remove. So that's what we're going to do now first. I'll start out. Now cooper would always have a block. He'd always work with his block. You mightn't necessarily have a bench, but he has to have a block to work on. So you might say, I'm in warehouse today, but I'm at the block tomorrow. And what we'll do is we'll rest it on the block. We'll hit it exactly as it's supported by the block. We'll always start in the middle. And we'll work down it. And we're starting to get some shape into it. We do that on all four sides. We'll go on the other side. And I'm starting to get some shape into it. And as I was saying earlier, they could be so good with an axe that when you run your hand along it, you think somebody had planed it, that you'd have no tool marks. And then the next step we go to this tool here, called a horse. Not an uncommon term. You might have a clothes horse, you might have a saw horse. In coopering, we call the one that you stand at, like this, a horse. But if you have the one that you sit on, or you can use, we call that a mare. So you sit on the mare, but you stand at the horse. And what we do then is, we're in here, push down the lever. Now the wood is clamped, and I can work on it. And I work on it with knives. What I have here is a draw knife. And one tip for anybody with a draw knife, we always got the ends a bit bent over. It gives you more control, easier to work, instead of just dead straight, okay? This is what I call a backing knife. I'm doing the outside of the barrel, the back of the barrel. Once I have it in here, I can now start to work on it. And the old coopers, when they do it, they would use their upper body. They wouldn't use their arms too much, they would go, and so on. So that's the draw knife, what I call a backing knife. On the inside, I have what I call a hollowing knife. That's the inside the barrel. So I put it in like this. This is the only one tray that needed this shape. That tool, the draw knife or hollow backing knife, is in lots of crafts. It's in shipwrights, chairmakers, wheelwrights, coopers, lots of crafts. And then I can, and you can see how big a curl you can get off it. That's how sharp the tools have to be. That when you're finished now, you think somebody had planed it, it's finished and all. And that essentially starts to give me my shape. Once I get to that stage, and I'm going to make, typically for a barrel, I'll need about 30 of these. I'll end up with 27, 28 in the cask, on average. I'll always do a couple of extra in case one breaks on me. But that's where I am. And the next step after this is to go into this tool called a jointer. So I'm going doing the joint of the stave. this part here, okay? The angle of the stave depends on the width of the stave. The wider my stave, the more fall of the angle, because I'm taking up more circumference of the cask. I have to angle it more. If I have a straight stave, a thinner stave, it's very straight. It's not the same angle. But what I must do is they must match. If the angles are wrong and it's open on the inside, I get leaks. And I don't want leaks. So what I want to achieve is, so we start out with this wine stave, put it on here. So in coopering, we hold the plane. In carpentry, you hold the wood in a vise and plane it. It's the opposite way in coopering. We hold the plane, we run the wood over it. And I can and then do the other side. So I can tilt my hands one way to go one direction or back the other way. And then when I get that fall, I must decide, is this the correct angle for this width of stave? This one has got one angle, this is very straight. I need to put more fall on that side. Just have to and I'm always working from the halfway point. And there we are. We have that finished already. And that would be what I'd have to repeat the whole way around. What you don't want to do is leave your fingers too long, take the tops off, or lose control and drop your hand down into the blade. So it can be dangerous, but if you pay attention, it's a really fast, efficient way to get your stave made. And once we have all that done, we then come to assembly. So if you look at this photograph here, what we have here is a gun. It's just made to this stage. So we've made it wide in the middle, getting thinner towards the ends. The length doesn't matter all that much at this point. We can cut them to the right length. This hoop here, we call a master hoop. That's only for making. Once that's full with staves all the way around, and it's tight and level, that's the size of my cask. I know the length of the stave, that will give me the diameter. We then light a fire inside the cask with all the shavings and bits of wood we've left over. Once the wood gets hot enough, the staves get hot enough, I'm cooling the outside here with water to try and keep some moisture for the bending. So we don't bend all these pieces one by one, we do it all in one go. Once it's hot enough, put a cable around here, wind in the cable, pull in my staves, and I've got my shape. I've got the shape that I'm looking for. Leave the cask cool down, and that shape will hold. And then I've got to start to work on the inside here. I shave the top of the cask with the adze to get that shape. I then plane the inside with the hoil. Then I close it for the groove. Then I measure with the compass for my lid. So there's quite a lot of work to make one by hand using the hand tool I've just showed you. It would take 1 day to make one barrel. To make a butt would take 2.5 butts a week or 5 every 2 weeks, 5 a fortnight. Because there's a lot more staves and it's a bigger cask. This photograph is Dublin in Bow Street in 1908. And you can see guys sharpening an axe on a stone, and we have one the same as here. We have a butt being repaired. This stave here has gone into it. I do it the exact same way, and it's the exact same way the Romans were. When I say a butt, it's the bigger cask. This is a Roman cask. This is going back to Roman times. It's the same size and capacity, except now we have steel hoops. That's the only difference. Got the guy on the horse, the guy with the axe, preparing the stave. This guy's grandson was here a couple of years ago. His grandson is Gabriel Byrne, the actor. This is Gabriel Byrne's grandfather, working for Jameson in 1908. Guy sharpening his knife in the same way we've done a while ago, the stone. The foreman with his bowler hat. The apprentice in his three-piece suit. So it wasn't a big day in the cooperage that the coopers were getting their photograph taken. That's the way coopers went to work. And when I started first, my dad and all the other coopers always wore a tie, and the tie never came off. It wasn't such a prestigious day to get a photograph taken. As I said, that's the way they went to work. They went dressed almost like the bank manager. It was so prestigious as a craft that you could make a vessel by eye, by hand, that could hold any liquid for 30, 40, 50 years if necessary. And back then, it was so highly paid. So I have to chase my boss to make sure I get paid a bit better. The other major difference now is the next process. So once we heat the cask here to get it for bending, that's called toasting the barrel, okay? So if there's wine stave here, it's just lightly toasted on the inside. Maybe this is a better sample of it. We got a butt stave, the bigger cask. You can see how white that is. That's called toasting the barrel. That's as far as they'll go when they're making the barrel. Because in the wine business, if you go too far and over oak your wine, you won't be able to drink it. So they just want a light cooking of the wood. And that's what we're doing here. We're cooking the oak. It's so scientific now, they can measure how much heat is going into the wood. So a winery might say, I want a light toast or I want a heavy toast. It's totally up to them how much toasting they get. But in the whiskey business, what we found was that casks that had been completely burned, or charred as we call it, that the whiskey tasted better and matured faster. So what we're doing with the toasting and the charring is we're cooking the oak. It's really important. For something like Jameson Black Barrel, we do it a second time, where we want to get much more cooking into the oak, much more sweetness, much more vanilla, caramel releasing into the whiskey. We're crystallizing all those sugars and vanillas in the oak, and they can release into the whiskey or the wine or the brandy or whatever you want to put in it. So that's a major difference between American wood and European. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to remove the lid so we can look at the inside of this cask, but more importantly, we can smell all that oak flavours coming from it. So the great thing about a barrel or a cask is you can take the whole thing apart, repair it, or disassemble it into a bundle and ship it to wherever you want to ship it to. So we'll remove the hoops. And then we can take it. It's a fantastic smell of oak from that. Now, most people, when I do this with them, they go, fantastic smell of whiskey from the cask. There is no smell of whiskey. This is a dried out barrel. What you're smelling when we smell this now, I know you can't smell it on video, but it's oak we're smelling, and that rich vanilla, caramel, toffee notes, charred wood that we typically see in our whiskies like Jameson Black Barrel and Jameson and Redbreast and all of those. It's the oak. And that's why we use different types of oak, like European, American, Hungarian, French, Japanese, to get different flavours. They will all do something different. And one of our products called Dar Gaelic, which means Irish oak, what we do is we fell in the forest 8 trees, and we number the log, 1 to 8 or 1 to 7, depending on how many logs we fell. We're governed by how much can fit on the truck weight-wise. We then season those logs separately, log 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we make the barrels from each log. So we might get 3 barrels out of one, we might get 7 out of another, depending how good the quality of the log is. And then when we bottle, we put the number of the 3 on the bottle, tree number 1, tree number 2, tree number 3. People have gone back to the forest where those trees were felled and put the bottle back on the stump of the tree that matured it. But what we also found is that even though it's the same forest, same trees, maybe the same age even, there'll be different tastes from different trees. They will slightly be different, and that's even the same forest. So when you go different types of oak, you get totally new flavours. So that's the end of our discussion. gives you some indication of what coopering is about and the art of coopering and the tools and the traditions. We could stay here all day talking about some of the stories and what people got up to and all that, but maybe we'll do that for the next session.
Thank you, Ger. Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to Ger as much as I did. It's fascinating to me that in spite of best efforts to modernise, the traditional methods and the traditional hand tools seem to be the only way to go. With the recent boom in the Irish whisky market, the future looks bright for the craft. If you're ever in Cork yourself, the Middleton experience is well worth the visit. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. Till next time, slán go fóill.